Welcome to the Voice of Islam. The Voice of Islam is a weekly radio program organized by the Islamic Council of Jamaica, the umbrella organization for the Muslim community in Jamaica, to propagate the message of Islam, dispel the common misconceptions about Islam, and facilitate a medium to provide Islamic perspective on topical issues and alternative solutions. You may contact the Islamic Council of Jamaica at 648-9545. That's 648-9545. You are listening to the Voice of Islam. Before we begin, let's take a few minutes to listen to the recitation of verses selected from the final revelation to mankind, Al-Quran.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim.
In the name of Allah, the entirely merciful, the especially merciful.
Wal 'asr.
By time.
Innal insana lafi khusr.
Indeed, mankind is in loss.
إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر.
Except for those who have believed and done righteous deeds, and advised each other to truth, and advised each other to patience.
You are listening to the Voice of Islam.
We praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we seek His guidance. For whomsoever Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bestows guidance upon, none can lead astray. But whomsoever has taken the wrong path after the clear proof from Allah, then indeed none can lead aright.
You are listening to the Voice of Islam.
So when we look at fasting, what do we think of? What are some of the morals behind this? So this is what we're going to look on, inshallah. When we try to present the understanding of what Ramadan is and what we do within the month of Ramadan to our non-Muslim neighbors, we should highlight 5 points. And so I'd like to highlight these points, these values that Ramadan or fasting brings about, that has to do with the structure or the framework of this being a pillar from the pillars of Islam. When we look to Islam, we realize that there are 5 pillars upon which this religion is built. One of them, or the 4th one, is fasting in the month of Ramadan. And there are many things to say about the results and the rewards of fasting. The results it reap in terms of getting the rewards from Allah, in terms of self-restraint, uplifting yourselves spiritually, getting closer to Allah. These are some of the results of fasting. But how does fasting ties into it being a part of the framework of Islam? And I want to make that distinction, and I want it to be very clear that fasting is the 4th pillar of Islam, which means that it is an integral part. It is an integral part of the framework of our belief of Islam. And so what are the values that makes it a part of this framework? I will begin to highlight this by mentioning 5 values of Islam that makes it a pillar of Islam. 5 values of fasting that makes it a pillar of Islam. Number 1, the first value is that fasting within Islam is an act of worship in and unto itself. And this is unique, and it is important to mention, and sometimes it goes unnoticed, that fasting by itself, its intrinsic value, what is belonging to fasting, is that it is an act of worship by itself. And this is unique to Islam. When we look to other belief systems and other religions, fasting in and of itself is not an act of worship, but it is a medium to attain other aspects of their faith. And so if a person wants to train himself, if he wants to practice self-restraint, then he fasts. We find that if an athlete wants to improve his health, he may want to lose some weight, he does intermittent fasting. And we find that even the polytheists, those who worship idols and many gods, this concept of fasting to them as an act of worship is foreign. It's not a part of their belief. If you were to look on how they even worship their gods and idols, they offer them food and drink. When fasting, we're expected to stay away from food and drink. So as an act of worship, fasting in Islam presents itself like this. And it's very important for us to understand this because it gives meaning to the saying of the Prophet Muhammad, may peace and blessings be upon him, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, when he said that Allah said that the children of Adam, every action they do belongs to them, except for fasting, for indeed it belongs to me. It is mine, and I will reward them accordingly. And what does this mean when Allah says, fasting is mine? Of the meanings is that no other God, no other deity, nothing is worshipped with this act of worship except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When we see that our brothers and sisters in humanity, our fellow Christians, who are our brothers and sisters in humanity, when they fast during Lent or any form of their fasting, we find that they do it to achieve an objective. So fasting within the month of Lent, or within the 40 days of Lent for them is to commemorate the journey. They say is to commemorate the journey that Isa ibn Maryam made into the desert. That is what? To commemorate. It is not an act of worship by itself. So this is very important for us to highlight that fasting for us as Muslims here, or huwa ibadah, it is an act of worship. The second value that forms a part of the framework of Islam that fasting presents is that this ibadah must be done, this act of worship must be done with pure sincerity.
You are listening to the voice of Islam.
There is no riyah or showing off within this act of worship, within fasting. Because you can be in this state of fasting and nobody sees you. Nobody knows that you're fasting. And so Islam is built upon that pure sincerity that fasting presents. And so this is why fasting, it is a pillar of Islam, because the framework of Islam is built upon sincerity. This is also one of the reasons why we know that fasting is for Allah alone. Because when you fast and you stay away from food and drink and sexual relations, only Allah knows whether or not you abstain from these things. Nobody can tell. And so it speaks directly to us being genuine. Especially when we have people around us who are disingenuous. They pretend to be good. They pretend to be adhering to a belief. When if they were alone without the eyes of everyone, they would go back to their bad habits. And so Islam brings out that genuine, sincere approach towards an act of worship. So number 3. Number 1, fasting is an act of worship by itself. Number 2, it is an act of worship that brings out pure sincerity. Number 3, it is an act of worship that is prescribed by Allah upon the creation in a particular fashion. And this forms the framework of our deen. Islam has to be prescribed. It can never be made up. And this is why Allah says within the Quran, Kutiba alaykumus siyam. Prescribed upon you is fasting. And so what does prescription mean? It means that there are details in how we fast, the method of fasting and who fasts. And so we know that it is prescribed upon every male and female, every Muslim, male and female, who are mature and sane. Fasting is prescribed upon them. They have no choice in the matter except that they fit within the exemptions. Maybe they are ill. They're unable to fast due to an illness. They're unable to fast due to them being travelers, and so on. But this is prescribed upon every Muslim, male and female. They have no choice in the matter. It is also prescribed at a specific time. And so the prescription of the time is unique even to Islam. Look on how fasting is observed by other people. They choose their times. Within Islam, we don't. It is an obligation that we must fast within the month of Ramadan. And so that prescription in relation to time highlights that we have to fast when the sun rises, that before the sunrise, at the break of dawn, before the sun rises, to sunset, to dusk. So from dawn to dusk, we have to stay away from food, drink, and sexual relations. And so this concept of fasting being a prescription highlights to us that Islam as a religion must be prescribed. As the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said very clearly, whomsoever introduces into this religion anything that is new, know that it is rejected. And so we cannot make up our own style or fashion of fasting. What is also prescribed is that fasting means that we abstain from three main things: food, any type of food, any type of drink. None of these things pass our throats, and the sexual intercourse during the daytime period.
You are listening to the Voice of Islam.
So that is prescribed upon us. We have to stay away from those things. And those who fulfill the meaning of fasting, they also stay away from foolish speech. They also stay away from misconduct. So they watch their actions. This is a prescription. Like everything else within this deen is prescribed. And this is the basis of our religion. This is why fasting is a pillar of our deen. Why? Because it is from the pillar of our deen that everything in terms of worship must be prescribed. We cannot bring anything new. Number 4, why is fasting a pillar of our Islam, of our religion? Number 4, it brings about a discipline that is the basis of our deen. Not that the result of fasting is that you are going to be more disciplined. We're not looking at the results of fasting. We're looking at the values of fasting as it being a pillar of Islam. And it is from the pillar of Islam, the underlying value is that we must be disciplined. Fasting presents that discipline. We have to pray 5 times a day. There is no going below that or above it in terms of obligation. And so we have to be disciplined to offer 5 daily salah. We must be disciplined that when the month of Ramadan comes, we must fast. There are no two questions about it. And we find that Islamic law, Sharia, is based upon this discipline. When salah time comes in, we have to pray. We cannot choose when to pray. Look at how Allah ordains the sun to move bringing or introducing each time it moves a different prayer time. So at the break of dawn, the movement of the sun introduces Fajr. That is discipline. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made the sun travel on a course each and every day following a specific order. And so when it reaches its highest point and starts to descend, the second prayer comes in. And then when it descends to a point where your shadow is twice the length of its object, another prayer comes in towards the afternoon. When it sets, another prayer comes in. And so even the discipline of the movement of the sun introduces to us our prayer times. Look at the moon. That we cannot introduce the month of Ramadan without the sighting of the moon. And so the movement of the moon and the observance of the moon, not that we worship the moon, but the movement of this is according to the order of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it introduces the month. And so fasting brings forth and it highlights that the entire creation is built upon this order. And everything of creation is disciplined in that fashion. And so when we look to fasting within the month of Ramadan, we find that the entire world is disciplined in that manner, where they start fasting and they end their fast with observing the same things. And so we should reflect on this value that fasting brings, that without discipline there is chaos. Without discipline there is no order. And so fasting brings and reminds us that it is a part of the pillar of Islam, because Islam is built upon order and discipline. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم من كل ذنب إن الله هو الغفور الرحيم.
You are listening to the Voice of Islam.
الحمد لله بنعمته تتم الصالحات وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ولي المؤمنين والمؤمنات وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله اصطفاه واجتباه فآتاه الآيات البينات. Indeed, all praises belong to Allah. We bear witness that there is no one worthy of worship except Allah, and that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the last and final messenger of Allah. When we look to the month of Ramadan, we find that as Muslims we observe the act of worship which we know as fasting. We also know that fasting is the fourth pillar of our deen, but how do we recognize fasting as a part of the pillars of Islam? We recognize it by knowing that one, fasting is an act of worship. And all the pillars of Islam find themselves as acts of worship sincerely for Allah. Number two, that fasting presents pure sincerity, and all our actions must be based on sincerely executing them for the sake of Allah. We also find that fasting presents itself as a prescription from Allah to humanity, and all the pillars of Islam are prescribed in detail as to how they should be observed. And fasting presents that. Number four, fasting highlights the discipline upon which Allah has created everything into existence, and the discipline required to observe them all. Number five, and this is my last point, that fasting highlights, making it a pillar of Islam, highlights the concept that Islam considers the needs of others. And as a Muslim, when we observe fasting, it is for us to reflect on the circumstances of our fellow brothers and sisters in humanity, whether they are Muslims or not. And if we were to look at the atrocities, the crimes that are committed on a daily basis within our society, every day there is a headline every day there is a minimum of 3 gruesome murders every day. When we look at this within our society, we say that our people, as human beings, our people, some of them don't consider others. But all the pillars of Islam, the foundation of it is that there is consideration for the creation. Salah is built upon that consideration for creation, because it was prescribed as 50 prayers, and for the consideration of humanity, it came down to 5. Fasting has that, charity has that. Consideration for others. Fasting, it highlights this value, that it is an act of worship that considers, and it allows us to reflect on the circumstances of others. Those people who have nothing to eat, we feel their hunger. We feel their hardship. We know what it's like to be thirsty and to be hungry within the month of Ramadan. It is a month fasting also brings out the best within us. And so it does consider us as human beings, because when you fast in the month of Ramadan, you are able to accomplish other good deeds. I'll finish with this point, that fasting allows you to perform more salah. So in the month of Ramadan, you're making more voluntary salah while you're fasting. It makes you feel a little more charitable. So you want to feed the poor. And so you're combining all these actions or these acts of good deeds. You're fasting, which is hard enough. But then on top of that, you're feeding, or you're cooking and feeding the poor. You're giving charity. You're attending the masjid. You're performing salah. You're getting up at night and you're praying. You're reciting the Quran more. You're making du'as more. You're asking of Allah. You are combining so many good deeds within this short period of time while you're fasting. I say that this is a consideration. Fasting is a consideration of our human nature. That when we engage in something that is prescribed by Allah, we find it easy to accomplish other actions that are prescribed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When someone is engaged in disobedience, major sin, they find it difficult. These major sins are not prescribed by Allah. They find it difficult to perform the actions that are prescribed by Allah. But when you're engaged, when the human being is engaged in that which is prescribed by Allah, then he's able to accomplish more. And so this is a consideration of the human nature. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has prescribed this, and so we also consider our fellow brothers and sisters in humanity while we're fasting, in the sense that they too are hungry, so we should feed them. They too need attention, so we should give it to them. And so these are the 5 values that make fasting a pillar from the pillars of Islam. It is an act of worship. It is prescribed in detail. It is based upon sincerity. It demands discipline upon which Sharia is framed. And it is a consideration of our human nature.
You are listening to the Voice of Islam.
If you thought that you were headed north and you had went 100 miles and you found out that you were headed south, would you go a couple more miles? No, you wouldn't. Because you already know that even when you turn around right there, you're already 200 miles out of the way. The 100 miles you went wrong and the 100 miles coming back. This is right? And if I had some money for you, if it was announced to you that you had won a prize and you were asked, would you like to have that prize now or later on? What would you say? If you're smart, you'd say right now. So my answer to you, in all honesty and sincerity, is that if you want to change your heart and you want to change your mind and you want to change your orientation and you want to come back to your natural disposition of serving the Creator, do it now.
Thank you all for listening to The Voice of Islam, a weekly radio program organized by the Islamic Council of Jamaica to propagate the message of Islam, dispel the common misconceptions about Islam, and facilitate a medium to provide Islamic perspective on topical issues and alternative solutions. Remember, you may collect a free Quran, yes, a free Quran, by emailing us, sending a text message, or visiting any of our locations. Please send in your questions and comments to islamradiojm@gmail.com. That's islamradiojm@gmail.com, or by text message to 892-1350. That's 892-1350. You may also visit our Facebook page, facebook.com/Islamic Council of Jamaica, or find us on Instagram at ICOJ_official, or you may listen to a past episode on our YouTube channel, Islamic Council of Jamaica. You may also visit any of the following locations: Islamic Council of Jamaica, 24 Camp Road, Kingston 4. Masjidul Aziz, Portmore Central Plaza, West Tradeway, Portmore. Masjidul Rahman, Windsor Road, Spanish Town. Islamic Dawah Center, 1 Makati Street, Montego Bay. Masjidul Hakim, 138 Main Street, Ocho Rios. Masjid As-Sabr, Albany, St. Mary. Masjid Hussein, 3 Miles River, Westmoreland. Masjidul Haq, New Green Road, Mandeville. Masjid An-Nur, Port Maria, St. Mary. Masjidul Ihsan, West End Road, Negril. Masjid At-Taqwa, Newell, St. Elizabeth. Masjid Ibrahim, Riversdale, St. Catherine. Masjid As-Sakina, 26 Miriam Way, Montego Bay. Peace be upon you all. Assalamu alaikum.